Hello! Hope you're doing marvelous. This is going to be a tutorial on how to edit MIDI data in Logic Pro. So whether you have a keyboard that you want to play that in, whether you want to type it in using the musical typing keyboard in Logic, or whether you just want to draw it in by hand. I'll just do a quick overview of all that stuff. So first, let's say you've got a MIDI keyboard that's hooked up and it's functioning and you want to play that in. Well, the first thing you're going to need is a digital instrument or a software instrument. So in order to do that, you're going to need to hit this little button here and create a software instrument. And Logic allows you to pick what plugin or what type of instrument you want. There's all these cool built-in instruments. There's Alchemy, which is a synth. There's Drum Kit Designer if you want drums. All these different synthesizers and samplers. If you have your own audio units, like I've got, all the East-West stuff, or Spitfire, you can load those up. But let's just say we've already created one. I've already got an Alchemy patch here, and I'm going to go ahead and record some data in. So first, what you need to do is record enable the track. So hit this little R button so it's blinking, or on, rather, it's not blinking. And then you're going to hit record up here, and I'm going to play something in right now. So I'm going to hit Command K and open up my musical typing, or you can go up to the window here and hit show musical typing. All right, and now you can play back things on your keyboard. And this goes the same for if you've already got a MIDI keyboard hooked up. You can just play your part in. Okay, so here we go. Looks like I hit a wrong note there, which is perfect because I can show how we can edit that. So if you hit S, it's going to solo out what you played. That's the default in Logic. It's going to solo out the track so we can hear that back by itself. If you don't have the key command, just hit S here or solo the track out. So whenever you record something in Logic, it creates something called a region. And a region is this little square containing all of the MIDI data that you either write or play in. And if you move it, it's going to take that data with it, wherever you move it to. So to look at this, we can double click on it, and it'll open up this piano roll. Or you can hit Command 4, which is the default to bring up the full-size window, or you can go to Window and you can open up, where's the piano? Open piano roll right here. Okay? So if we play back, we're now hearing what I played in. Oh, there's a wrong note, and we can fix it. We can do that just by selecting it and dragging it up, or you can hit Option and the up arrow. So if you select that MIDI note, hold down Option, the up arrow, it will move it up by half-step increments. Okay, so now this should be right. Now another thing you can do is you can select all the notes and correct the timing by hitting the Q or quantized note over here. What that means is it aligns your timing to be perfectly on the grid. And right now it's set to quantize it by 16th notes, which is the musical division. So in every bar there are, it's mathematically divided into quarters, into eighths, 16ths, 32nds, and so on. And that's what you're seeing here. So if we hit this to Q, it's just going to move it to the nearest 16th. Now if we want to move it to quarter notes, there we go. It's going to align it up to the quarter notes. Now, let me just explain what a piano roll is. The piano roll actually comes from, I believe, the 1800s, where the original automatic playing pianos were controlled by these paper rolls, which basically took notation and made them into these punch lines, and they were actual rolls of paper. And the rolls of paper, when they were rolled, the piano would follow that roll of paper and play the music back. And that's what this is. So this is the actual the keys on the piano. So this would be like C, D, E, F, G, and these are the length of the quarter note. So if we were looking at the piano roll paper, it would actually turn, this would be the top of the paper, and this would be the bottom of the paper. So yeah, this is basically going off of that old technology. So if you hear of, the old saloon piano roll pianos, those are the first MIDI instruments, really. So we can move these MIDI notes to change them in timing just by clicking and dragging. So just like that. We can also, if you go to the side here, you can click and drag to the left or the right to make the note shorter or longer. So now that leaves some space in between the note. And you've got a little toolbox up here. If you click on this, you've got a pointer tool, which is basically your arrow tool where you can do all the basic functions, where you can click and drag, you can resize the notes. There's this pencil tool, which will allow you to draw in notes. So if you click and drag, I'm writing new notes. So if you don't feel comfortable playing in a melody, you can just draw it in, which is very, very common, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, think about all the composers who wrote everything down with pencil and paper. So wherever you click with this pencil, it's going to draw the note on that pitch. So vertical is your pitch, and horizontal is your time. And if you click and hold and keep dragging, you can drag the length of the note, right? So, and it will remember the last length that you drew. So if I click again, it's going to draw the previous length, and so on and so forth. Now if I change it again and make it, let's see here, oops, if I make it shorter, so I'm clicking and holding and dragging left to right. If I make it shorter, it's now going to remember what I just drew. So now if we play back, now another thing is if you go back to this pointer tool and you select the first note, if you right and left arrow, it'll select each note. So if you're trying to play this tune out in your head quickly, now let me change this to like a piano or something. Let's go to studio. Let's go to electric piano. Okay. So if you're trying to play this quicker than real time, if I select each note by left and right arrow, you can hear the melody. So, and let's say we want to move this note up. I just hold Option and up arrow. Cool, right? And if you want to go up the octave, you hold down Shift, Option, and up and down arrows. So that can really speed up your workflow, okay? Now there's the eraser tool, which will just go ahead and erase notes. I find that a little bit unnecessary because you've got, you've already got a selector tool, so you can just, select something and hit the delete function. So I don't really use that tool. The There's the finger tool, which from what I understand also allows you to be more precise in selecting notes. Again, I also don't use this. Maybe some of you know a better use of it, but I still find that I just use the pointer tool. The scissors tool is actually very helpful because that will, you can split a note, right? So I can split a note here and then move it up or down. There's also the glue tool, which if I split this, I can now glue the two. So if I hit Shift and selected it, it merges the two together. There's the mute tool, which will go in and mute notes. There's also the quantize tool, which will quantize, a particular note. Let's say this was off a bit, so let's go like this, and let's say we could go to the quantize and click it, and it'll drag it to the nearest division over here. And again, if you change the division, that's what it will snap the notes to. So see, it snapped it to the bar. If it was a half note, and so on and so forth. Also, you can change your grid view here. Now, if you go to the main window here, I've got my custom view to show the grid divisions here. But if you go to Customize Control Bar and Display, you can show time signature division. So if you see I click this, it goes away. And so what you're looking for is this little grid guy. So right now it's just showing quarter notes, but we can go to eighth notes. And then that will change our division here. See here. So if I go and switch, notice there's less lines. Okay. Now let's go to our velocity tool. Now what is velocity? Well, velocity is basically how quickly or how loudly, I guess how loud you play a note. How much pressure you put down. So if you bang on a piano, that's a louder velocity. If you play really, really quiet, that's a softer velocity. So if I click on a note here and drag up or down, if you go up, that's a louder velocity. It's showing your velocity is 127. It will play back louder generally. If I click and drag down, it'll show a cooler note. If you notice that the color corresponds to the velocity, and you can actually drag it over here as well. So if we select a note, we can actually control the velocity here in conjunction with using this velocity tool. So that's actually one cool thing about this arrow pointer button is you can select a note and you still have the control over the velocity. Now when we're looking at velocity, there's also another way you can look at velocity, and that is this right here. This shows or hides the automation, or basically the controls kind of hidden underneath the MIDI. So if we hit that, this is our automation lane down here. And right now we're looking at volume. But if we wanted to look at velocity, you go here and select note velocity. And this is another way of looking. You can see the velocity on a vertical scale. So you can grab these and turn them up or down. Another thing you could do is, if you have your pencil tool, you could draw a decrescendo or a crescendo just by pointing and clicking up, which is kind of cool, right? So if this plays back, it gets gradually louder. Now, another thing to note, now we're in this automation lane, you have got pitch bend, you've got channel pressure, you've got all of these different MIDI controls, you've got sustain. Sustain is pretty common for piano, meaning that, let's say, you want this note to hold out longer, you would draw in sustain, and it needs to be either 127 or none. Which means it's either on or off. So if we draw this in here, we'll play back. Let's increase the velocity. And another quick key command, if you're using the arrow key, if you hold down Control and Command, it'll turn it to the velocity key, and you can turn it up or down quickly. Cool, huh? Now notice how that note is still carrying on. That's what the sustain pedal does. It's similar to the sustain pedal on a piano, or that's what it's emulating. It's those 3 little pedals or 2 little pedals. It's always the pedal on the right that when you hit a note and you let go, it continues to hold the sustain. So notice it continues to hold on, and if you want to turn it off, you'll have to click and drag it all the way off. So watch, it'll sustain until it turns off. Cool, huh? Now, another function is pitch bend, which means exactly what it sounds like. So if you click and drag, 0 is the center of your pitch. So if we click and drag up, it's going to bend it up. It does exactly what the pitch bend wheel on a lot of keyboards do. So we can drag down. Pretty neat, right? Modulation is the mod wheel on the keyboard, which, depending on the patch, does different things. So let's see if this patch even has a modulation function. So the modulation here is controlling the vibrato, if you hear that. So let's go back to our pitch bend, and I'll get rid of, I'm going to click and drag and delete it, so you just hear the modulation. Hear that? I'll turn it all the way up. And then we can slowly drag it down. And modulation can control a wide amount of functions depending on the instrument itself. So sometimes it controls vibrato, sometimes it controls volume, sometimes it controls pitch. It just depends on what is programmed into that instrument. So here we're starting the modulation at 100% and going down. And this 127 is just some MIDI coding, basically. Everything is counted in values from 0 to 127. 127 being the most, 0 being the least. MIDI channel, this is where you can select what channel you want this to be on. MIDI volume could control volume which is different than track volume. It's actual MIDI volume contained in this region. So if I drag this up or down, the track volume here will not change, so watch. But the actual volume of the let's be very dramatic here. The actual volume within the region here will change. See how the track here isn't changing, the actual track fader, but the volume within the region is, right? See, the volume the other way is this way. So if I automated it, so that's completely 2 different ways. One is actually automating the volume of the track, and one is the actual MIDI volume itself. And there's MIDI CC controllers which have faders that control these parameters, which is different than controlling the actual volume of the track. Let's see here, MIDI volume, MIDI pan, same concept. So you can pan MIDI information within the region, which is different than the pan of the actual audio track or instrument track. Expression is the same, is very similar to modulation. Some patches have expression, some don't. You just need to read up on what that patch does, and it's very similar to modulation. Channel pressure is kind of like an aftertouch. So some keyboards actually have this built in where if you press on a note and then you continue to press harder after the initial velocity, it will do things like vibrato or increases in volume. But the patch needs to have that capability, and so does the MIDI keyboard. So this isn't really too common when you're working within a DAW like this. Let's see, sustain, note velocity, pitch bend, channel pressure, program change. Cool. So that's the basics. One other thing to note is this second window here, or this drop down, meaning it's your second tool pad. So if you hit Command, it will bring up your second tool, which can be very useful. So say a common one is these two tools combined. So you can click and edit, and then if I want to draw another note, I can hit Apple and draw it in, draw another one, and then edit back. There's also the brush tool, which is really, really, really cool. This is great for repeating notes. So here, if I hit Apple or Command and drag, what it's doing is it's looking at our time quantized division with 16th notes. So if you want a repeated note, it'll do that. So here, let's do that again. And if we change the division, so let's go like this. Cool, right? Let's do quarter note. And if you click and drag up and down, you can make a melody really quickly. So if you have a quick, eighth note patch, right, and you want it to go here we go. Pretty neat, right? So there's also these other tools which I didn't go over. There is the zoom tool, which does what it says it'll do. You can click and drag a certain area and it'll zoom to that area, which can be very useful, right? So if we want to drag a bigger area, there we go. If we want to drag, boom. And then you can still use your standard zoom with your trackpad or mouse. There's also the automation select tool. The automation select tool is cool for just selecting automation. So if you notice when I drag, it just goes in this area that I select, whereas if I use the arrow key, it selects everything. So this is cool if you have different automation points like this, and you just want to select that area. There's also the automation curve tool, which you can use to make curves like that. Very similar to the volume automation, but this is MIDI automation. So over here is collapse mode, which can take, let's say we've got lots of spaces between our notes, right? So say we're playing a chord. Let's go. And another thing you can do is if you hit Option, click and drag, it will copy the note. So let's say I've got a chord. I'm going to select these two. And collapse view will collapse everything down into a smaller grid. So you can see more of your of what you've got going on without having to scroll up and down, right? So let's make this even deeper. See how wide this could get? So this collapses everything down, and then you can just kind of edit the timings of things or move them up and down. But it just gives you more of, I guess, a tactile view. So you can kind of see all of your notes in one little spot and edit them that way. Okay, so let's look at some of the quantize functions here. There's a strength thing, which basically says if you want to quantize things perfectly to the grid, very robotic, very electronic, you put it to 100% and it will align everything to the grid. If you want it to be a little bit more human, like say you just played something in perfectly, as humans do, you can control the strength of the quantization. Let me show you what that means. So I'm going to play something in right now. Here, let's delete this and let's record something. Okay, that's perfect because I played really off. So you can kind of see where my delayed timing is, whether that's my bad playing or whether that's because the computer's delayed. So what we can do is we can Apple A select all of these and we can quantize them. All right, so now they're perfectly on the grid. But say that's too perfect. We can control the strength and just make it at 70%. So if you notice, it's fixing it, but it's not perfect, right? So let's make it like 80. That can kind of give your track more of a human feel. Now, there's another thing in music called swing, which would give it more of that swing feel, that dooba 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 feel. So, like this is perfectly on the grid. Here's with 100% swing. And there's a whole discussion on swing. That's a whole other tutorial. I would look that up on what swing is in music. But that's how you can control the level of swing. And again, the quantization, you can control any number of notes, 64th notes, triplets, different types of triplets, basically a half note triplet, a quarter note triplet, an eighth note triplet, and different types of swing A, B, C, like you can control how strong that swing is, tuplets. It gets really, really deep, and you can play along with this. Let's see what else we got here. We've also got things called MIDI functions. And a MIDI function is really cool. I use this all the time. Logic is really, really was ahead of its time for its MIDI functions. So if you played something in like this and you want to make it more, let's say, more human, you can go up here to MIDI functions, and there's something called MIDI transform, where we can go down and we can humanize what we just did. We can go in and there's all these different functions. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but you can operate only. And what that just did is, here, I'll Apple Z it. It is randomizing my playing. So if you look, now it's changed the velocities and the timings to humanize. So let's say you draw in your part, play it perfectly, and then you want to sound more human, you just use that function. There's lots of other MIDI functions. Like you can have a fixed velocity. So we can say we want it to be 100. We want them all to be as loud as possible. Boom. it's done. The other ones are, there's random pitch. You could just completely make a random melody out of this. There you go. That could be kind of fun. You could do a crescendo. You can do double speed is really, really cool, actually. I use this a lot. Like, say, let's say our melody is this, and we want that to play in half the amount of time or double the speed. Go to MIDI transform, double speed, operate, and look at what it just did. And half speed would do the exact same thing. So if we want to bring it back to half speed, boom. And if you want to make it even slower, see how that could be pretty useful. There is also reverse position, reverse pitch. You could take a melody and invert it. You could transpose something. Let's say, you could just do that by hand, actually. But like if you selected all these notes, and you just select them all and hit the option up arrow, it'll take it up a quarter tone. Or option and shift up, it'll take it up an octave. Cool, right? But this transposition function will do exactly as you ask it to do. So let's take it up 3, and it just did it. Took it up 3. So let's undo it. Pretty cool, right? There is also exponential velocity. Exponential velocity is similar to the crescendo function. You can create a crescendo or a graph like this with the velocity data. Then we've got, let's see, velocity limiter. You could limit it. I showed you that one. Velocity limiter, you can limit the amount of velocity. Almost like an audio limiter, saying it can only get as loud as 100. There's also fixed note length. You can take all the note lengths and say they're only, the length of an 8th note, 16th note, whatnot. Same with the maximum note length and minimum note length, and quantize, which is what we just went over. So that is MIDI transform. Pretty deep, right? Another thing to note is this lock SMPTE position. Let's say you're working to picture and you accidentally move this and you don't know it. That could screw up your workflow. So say you're completely done, you're happy with your melody, even if you're not working to picture, you just like what you have and you don't want it to change, you can ensure that it stays fixed by hitting lock SMPTE. When you try to move it in the timeline, it will not move. It stays exactly where it is. So now back in the main window, you can take this region and move it to other tracks, or copy it. If you hold down Option and click and drag, you can do that. You can change the parameters within this region to be something different. Say you want this down the octave and up the octave. Well, there's some more MIDI functions. If you hit this I button over here, see this region drop down, we can now transpose this region. So we could go up the octave, so now it could play back. We could set the quantization from here. We could increase the velocity to make it louder overall. So this is playing back at normal. Now we're going to up it by 12. Or make it quieter. Pretty cool, right? You can also control the swing functions, and there is delay functions, which I've covered in another tutorial, which is very, very important when you're trying to time different samples. And you've got a lot of RAM being used and processing and buffer speeds. Say you're trying to line up a beat and this is a little bit off the grid. Like let's say the samples have a delay in them, right? So let's say, unlock this. They were a little bit behind. I'm going to turn on the, let's turn on the, okay. See how that's really behind? That happens sometimes when you're actually playing in time. Sometimes the computer's so overloaded that the sample's playback delayed. That's actually what happened in the first example when I was playing in. What you can do is you can go over to your delay and you can set the delay to be sooner so it actually plays on time. So you can play with this until you hear it play back on time. Watch. So almost. And no joke, some sample libraries I have to move it this far ahead to get it to play in time. And there you go. You've got your MIDI data still in its same place, but now it's playing in time because we messed with the delay. You can make it later by going in the opposite direction. Negative means ahead, plus means later. Dynamics, you can actually, this is 100%, we could make it more dynamic or fixed. So those are the basic functions that I would recommend you stick to. If you use all of those, you can get pretty deep. These are some more advanced functions, which I'm not going to get into at this time, and I rarely use them. Let's see, if we click on track, that will also show some more functions on the track itself, like the actual instrument channel, or your MIDI channel. If it's set to 1, 2, that just means that maybe your keyboard is only putting out channel 1, you'd want to change that to 1, or 2, and 3, 4, so on. And there's another thing where you can transpose via the actual track. So let's say, yeah, let's go ahead and delete this. Let's say that I'm playing in a C. Let me unmute this. Okay, let's say I only know how to play in the key of C, but I want it to play in the key of the song. Well, let's say the key of the song was in E. Well, here's C, and here's E. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 notes up, or 4 half steps up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to transpose 4 up. So when I play a C, it's actually playing an E. Pretty cool, right? So if we turn it off, so if you learn to play the piano in the key of C and you use this function, you can have it, you don't have to learn to play in the key of G flat or with, you know, an E major. You can just use this. How cool is that? Velocity is the same. It's going to, whatever you play, it's going to either make your playing louder or softer. So this velocity limit means that, say your keyboard's really too sensitive or it's not a fully weighted key, like I've got an M Audio that's semi-weighted, but when I'm really trying to play quiet, it actually plays too loud. So you can limit the volume level and play super, super quiet without having to worry about how loud you're hitting the keys. And delay will delay your timing in, as you play. I wouldn't really mess with that. And that is the basics, folks. One more thing is there are some quick key commands in this macro level, like if you hit R, Apple R, it will repeat, a region. I'm trying to think of what else. Oh, looping. If you take a region and you go up into the right top corner here, it will loop whatever you wrote, which is kind of cool. And you can turn that on as well, like you can turn off looping by selecting loop here. Or you can mute a region by muting it. And I think I pretty much covered most of the basics. Oh, a couple more things. There's this smart tool which will select how you move, how this snaps to the grid. So right now the smart is exactly what it does. The smart tool means that it will basically do what you want it to do. But if you just want it to align to, say, a bar and nothing in between, it's going to do just that. If you align it to beat, it will do just that. And so on and so forth with the divisions and frames and quarter frames, samples. But this smart tool is pretty smart, so stick with that. But if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up. I know I covered a lot, but those are the basics of all of the MIDI functions within Logic. I'm sure there's more I could cover, but if you have any questions, feel free to comment below. And if this was helpful to you, feel free to like and subscribe. And as always, have an awesome one wherever you are.